Well, let's come back home and take a look at what's happening in the workforce, in particular around industrial relations. And Jordi Hoare joining us from People, Culture and Strategies. Jordi, good to catch up with you again. So perhaps no surprise, a new federal government, or newish, wants to put its stamp on industrial relations. What's being proposed by the Albanese government?
Yeah, morning, Andrew. This has taken, I think, a number of people by surprise. I'd include myself in that category. If you go back to the election campaigns, it certainly wasn't identified as a prominent issue on either side of the fence that there'd be radical industrial relations or workplace relations reform. And I think a lot of people would say that the system was reasonably balanced in the lead up to that particular election, and there weren't a lot of headline items of controversy. But what we've seen the Albanese government now table under the auspices of their Secure Jobs, Better Pay bill, which is now before Parliament, is arguably some of the most radical industrial relations reform that this country has seen. Certainly, I would say it's on par in terms of some of the initiatives with the radicalism or perceived radicalism of the work choices changes, which you and viewers will remember was one of the things that contributed to the downfall of the Howard government in 2006, 2007, in the lead up to the Rudd government being elected back then. So this is really taking the Australian IR system back to some time in the 80s across a range of fronts. Some of the changes are probably necessary, but some of them, particularly in the enterprise bargaining, enterprise agreement realm, are going to be of great concern to employers. There's a lot in here.
Yeah, you mentioned enterprise bargaining there, the enterprise agreements that are in place at the moment. So how does it want to change those? And you mentioned the concern that businesses and employers have.
Yeah, that's right. I think one of the things that employers are always concerned about when it comes to anything to do with enterprise bargaining is any change in the dynamic that allows a more active intervention of the umpire. Enterprise bargaining works well for employers when it's really a free market debate, discussion, dialogue, negotiation, call it what you will. They know that if their employees have the support, or if a union is acting on behalf of their employees and there's a strong appetite for change terms and conditions, well, there's probably not going to be a huge amount that the employer is going to be able to do, but under the current laws, they can't be compelled to be agreeing to anything. Under the proposed laws, there's going to be a lot more power and scope given to the Fair Work Commission, whereby they will be able to intervene at a far earlier stage and far more actively and assertively than is currently the case. They've introduced this notion of what's referred to as an intractable bargaining situation. And if after a certain period of time the Fair Work Commission considers that, look, there's really nothing that's going to give here in terms of this bargain or negotiation between employees and or unions and their employer, we're going to step in and we're going to be able to make some orders in relation to that. So that is understandably of significant concern for employers at a time where there are so many challenges, as we all know, for employers and business generally. And that's only one part of the changed landscape in all of these reforms.
Does it also give rise perhaps to the prospect of more industrial action in that it's likely to be protected under the Fair Work Commission?
That's right. I think industrial action has probably been something that, I'm not aware of the statistics off the top of my head, but if one looks back at the last decade, I'd hazard a guess that it's probably seen the least industrial action as against many previous decades. And that's largely because of what the IR legal system allows or doesn't allow parties to do. Now, again, that is looking to be changed. And so the whole dynamic of, yes, agreements are going to, in some ways, be able to be made a little bit more easily. Some of the red tape is being removed, but the fact that you can have the industrial umpire intervening a lot more quickly, you can have bargaining initiated far more quickly. So employers are going to be forced to the table, and they're going to be forced to the table in a much more meaningful way. Throw into the mix that industrial action can now be taken, or is likely to be able to be taken more readily and more easily. dangerous time to be an employer in the industrial relations context.
All right, and specifically, there's some concern around fixed-term contracts. What does that amount to?
Yeah, one of the things that's been happening for a while, and I'd put this into the category of it's probably quite a sensible tidy up. A lot of employees are engaged by their employer on a fixed term contract, and that's fine if they're doing a project and the project's for 12 months and it starts and stops and that's reasonable. But what often happens is that an employee will be engaged on a series of rolling fixed term contracts, and before you know it, that first 12-month contract is in its fourth or fifth iteration. The person's been with you for 4 or 5 years as a result of that, but you haven't recognised or converted them to permanent employment status. So there's going to be a clampdown in relation to that, which means that employers are going to have to be a lot more diligent. There are circumstances where you can still have people on fixed term contracts, but if you're in this habit of just rolling these fixed term contracts over with a view to avoiding payment of leave obligations and other things, this legislation is going to bring that unstuck.